It is 1 o'clock, so I am going to go ahead and get started. This is our annual congregation meeting. We do this every year near the end of June. This is my 20th annual congregation meeting that I have led as your senior pastor, and it is my last annual congregation meeting that I'm leading as your senior pastor. So that's kind of interesting. But it's really a privilege to be with you today. As co-hosts with me today, you'll be getting a chance to see or hear from them as the meeting goes on. First of all, Ken Rack, our board chair, is going to be with us in just a minute to share our opening devotions, and then Ken is going to check back in to give us a little update on the senior pastor transition later in the meeting. We also have Nick Price, our senior pastor-elect, and he's going to be helping me with some of the transition, with some of the presentation today. If there are questions regarding some of the numbers in our budget, we also have Sally Hageland, our business manager, who is available to pop up and address those questions as well. Just a couple of things about the meeting today. First of all, as we've done in the past with these meetings, we are going to be using, first of all, that chat button that's at the bottom of your screen. By the way, you should be able to see right now me in one side of your screen, and you should be able to see the presentation on the other side of your screen. And there's a little slider in the middle that if you drag that back and forth either way, you should be able to either make the presentation larger or me larger, depending on which one of those you want. I would encourage presentation as large as possible, me as small as possible. But we will be using the chat if you would like to make comments. So for example, I can see Nick has already made a comment in that chat saying hello to the Trinity family and thanking you for joining us for the meeting. You can put your comments there at any time, and those comments are seen by everybody, as long as you make sure that you have the thing at the bottom selected to panelists and attendees. So as long as it says panelists and attendees, where you type in your answer there or your thing there, everybody will see that in the chat. And then we're also going to use this Q&A as well. And if you open up that window, it's a separate window. That's where we'd like you to ask your questions. We do have somebody monitoring the Q&A, and we have someone monitoring the chat as well. So if you ask a question in the chat, they may say, hey, ask your question in the Q&A, just to make sure that that question is heard and addressed. We want to address all of your questions today so that you can cast an informed vote on our ministry plan and budget at the end of the meeting. We are not going to be using the raise hand feature. So if you raise your hand using that raise hand feature, nothing will happen. Okay. So use the chat, use the Q&A, don't use the raise hand feature. Also want to point out that the documents for our meeting today, which include the minutes from last year's congregation meeting, the minutes from our special congregation meeting in September, the resolution for our ministry plan and budget that we'll be voting on today. It also includes the budget detail in the PDF. Now I'll be showing that on the screen, but if you'd like that detail there as well. And then also it includes a new org chart. That was one of the requests at our open forum, that we make sure we share an org chart with you today, and we'll be doing that. That is in there as well. By the way, if there were no significant changes to the actual numbers that we'll be asking you to approve today from the open forum, so that PDF is the same one as before. In the email that you got today reminding you about this meeting, there was a link to download those documents. So hopefully you've had a chance to do that. We also, if you registered just within the last 24 hours, your registration email should have also had that link for you to download those documents. Or as Nick has posted, if you go to tlc4u.org right now /meeting, the documents are there to download as well. You could do that while Ken is doing his devotion. We won't tell. And you could get those documents downloaded so you can follow along during the meeting. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Ken Rack. Let me see here, make sure I'm doing this. Oh, wait. Trying to make sure. Oh, I think maybe I have to unpin me. There you go. Ken is now on the screen, and Ken, I'll turn it over to you for our opening devotions and then for the approval of our minutes.
All right, thank you, Mark. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for taking time this afternoon to join us for the meeting. Just so you can tell that we do wind up looking at and doing things somewhat independently. A lot of the things that Mark already said were things I'm going to probably repeat a little bit in our devotion here today, but here we go. As you all know, Trinity's a church that encourages people to look, live, and love like Jesus. And we've got a lot of people that do that in so many different ways. And a lot of them are in ways that, we get to see on a regular basis. But then there are a lot of people that do a lot of work behind the scenes. And they don't get a lot of credit for it because they're just humble people who serve. So to all those people and all those different roles, I just want to say thank you, because you are making a big difference in a lot of people's lives. And one of those examples that I wanted to share is something that Mark already touched on. A week ago today, we had an EF3 tornado that went through our area and caused a lot of damage. I think this morning I read in the paper 230 homes, I think, were damaged in the general area. And some people had small amounts of damage, and some people had so much damage, in our congregation where their homes uninhabitable. So some of our unsung heroes include our alert team, and I do think it's the Lutheran Emergency Response Team, but anyway. And then we also had a lot of young adults there from our Shine group and a number of other people that were there in our community who were out helping other people and essentially being Jesus's hands and feet out there within our community. They were putting their faith into action by doing things like cleaning up debris, and as Mark mentioned, cooking food for anybody who wanted it, not only the people who were impacted by the storm, but also the workers that were in that area who just wanted something to eat. And then there were people just there helping, just being there just with their presence for comfort and other things for the people who were impacted by the storms. And the professional workers that were in those areas, meaning the non-paid ones, took note that something special was going on. And they made a comment to one of our members who were there that, what, this is really great. You've got something special here. Where are you all from? And that opened a door for someone to say, we're all part of the Trinity family. So why do I bring all this up into context for our meeting and our devotion here? And it's really for two words: grace and serving. I mean, we all know God freely gives us his grace, and he gives it to all of us. But since the purpose of today's meeting is to review our plans that we presented at the open forum meeting and providing an update on the senior pastor transition plan and voting on our plans going forward, I think it's a good time to reflect on what God's word says. And from some of these passages that I'm going to go over, I'd like you to try and listen for where you hear about grace and serving. So this verse is from Psalm 67. May God be gracious to us and bless us and make his face to shine upon us, that your way may be known on the earth, your saving power among all nations. Let the people praise you, O God. Let all peoples praise you. Let the nations be glad and sing for joy. For you judge peoples with iniquity and guide the nations upon the earth. Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all people praise you. The earth has yielded its increase. God, our God, shall bless us. God shall bless us. Let all the ends of the earth fear him. So we've got a lot of places in God's word where, gives us some guidance in those two main areas. And these next verses are from John chapter 15. And the beginning of that chapter kind of starts out with the familiar verses that you are all aware of. I'm the true vine and my Father is the vine dresser. But then if you go down a little bit farther and go into verse 12, listen to this. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, so that you will love one another. So the good thing is that, we're not having to do all these things or relying on ourselves. So please listen to these words from 2 Corinthians. This is chapter 9. Remember this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your own heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver, and God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. The service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of the Lord's people, but is overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. Because of the service which you have provided, others will praise God for the obedience that accompanies your confession of the gospel, and for your generosity in sharing with them and with everyone else. And in their prayers for you, their hearts will go out to you because of the surpassing grace God has given you. So thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. So I think that's important today, that as we hear Pastor Mark and Pastor Nick talk about the plans that we've got here, that we remember each of us has a part to be Jesus's hands and feet in our local communities, where we're living, and also where our mission partners are around the world. So as we think about this, I would ask you to think about how you can wind up making an impact with your time, talent, and treasures. I do look forward to the time when we can actually meet in person, and I don't have to look at that silly little camera right there, and I can see everybody's faces again. So let me close up with these words from Philippians, and then just a short prayer. So this is Philippians chapter 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and mind in Christ Jesus. So let's pray. Lord, thank you for your grace. Thank you for your love, and forgive us for the times when we try and essentially do all of it on our own instead of relying on you. Thank you for the blessings that you have given all of us individually and as Trinity as a church. You blessed us with all of our sites, Lord, and a gifted team and staff and members that are here, and we thank you for all of those blessings so that we can get more people in heaven. Lord, we ask you to guide our thoughts and actions today, so what we're doing is something that would make you happy. Please bless our time together here today and guide us with your love. In your name, amen.
Thanks, Ken. We're going to go ahead and keep it with you for the approval of the minutes.
All right, so we will be opening a poll here, and what we're doing, as Mark mentioned from the notes that you were able to download, please go ahead, and we are going to be approving the meeting minutes from our last congregation meeting and our open forum. So is the poll ready, Mark? Yes, it is.
It is. I just went ahead and launched it.
Okay. So please go ahead and vote.
By the way, Ken, while that's happening, just to let people know, we have 106 connections right now. Some of those are panelists, but so we should be seeing, we have 103 possible people able to vote. You know, as you're going ahead and doing that, just a couple of other things. A couple people have asked before the meeting why we were still going to go ahead and do this meeting online, and the main reason we're doing that is because, first of all, a bunch of people had already registered online when we went into phase 5 in the state here of Illinois. And so we recognized that we had already kind of announced it was going to be online. But also, like this morning for worship, we still had about half of our folks that are still online for worship and about half that are showing up in person. So that's good progress, but still a lot of people are at that point where either because of medical reasons or maybe lack of vaccination, they're not able to be in person. So we felt sticking with this online was the right thing to do. So Ken, it looks like I'm going to go ahead and end that poll now, and we have 100% of the people that voted have approved. So we have officially approved the minutes.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so I will go ahead and stop that. And let me just talk for a minute about what our agenda is going to be today. First of all, I'm going to be sharing with you in just a moment our governing board election results. We did have almost 400 people that cast ballots in our online governing board election during the first couple of weeks of June. And we had 4 candidates running for 2 positions, and I'll be sharing those results with you in just a moment. Also want to give you just a quick worship update on where things are at, especially from a COVID restrictions perspective, and just an encouragement to get back to in-person worship. So we'll be doing that. And then we'll be sharing the ministry plan and budget for fiscal year 22, and that'll give you a chance to vote and approve that. And then finally, we will get a little senior pastor transition update. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is my last annual congregation meeting as your senior pastor. And so we just want to give you a little update on what's happening with that and with that transition. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get going. So first of all, I want to let you know that our 2 incumbents, Ken Rack and Marion Flatham, were both reelected to the board. Each were elected to a second 4-year term. Our Constitution and bylaws allow people to serve for 2 consecutive 4-year terms on our board. And so we're thankful to Ken and to Marion. Marion's been serving as our secretary and is in fact taking minutes of our meeting right now. And Ken, as you saw, has been our congregation chair. And so both of them were reelected to our board for another term, and we're thankful for their willingness to serve. We also want to thank Paul Nofke and Vendetta Blau, who were also on the ballot. And we're thankful to them for being willing to serve. I was at Trinity South Naperville for worship this morning and had a chance to talk with V a little. And she was thrilled to be part of the process and certainly thrilled to see God's hand at work through all of you in the election. And she certainly has plenty of ways that she's continuing to serve, and Paul as well. So we're thankful to both of them for being willing to run. And either one of them would have been fantastic members of our board. And so we were really thrilled to have just a great slate to put in front of you for the election this year. Just to remind you then what that means for our board, with Ken and Marion being reelected, the board remains basically the same as it has been for the last year, and that is Paige Craig and Doug Dorgan and Justin Zeman. Justin has been serving as our treasurer this year. Also Sandy Jett and Darlene King and Joe Vasic. I should mention Doug has been our vice chair as well. And so that the board, by the way, in the next month will be electing new officers, or maybe potentially the same officers, who knows, we'll see. And we will, of course, let you know about that as it happens. But we are thankful to all of these folks for serving as a part of our governing board. It is really a great joy and privilege to serve with them as your leadership for the congregation. So let's talk about worship a little bit. As you know, this last month, Illinois moved into phase 5. Which means there are now no restrictions as far as capacity anymore in places. And if people are fully vaccinated, there is no more mask mandate for them. And so we are thankful that God has carried us through to this point here in our state. Just to give you a little bit of good news regarding those state numbers, this past week, we've been averaging just around 240 new cases per day throughout our whole state. That's 13 million people in Illinois. So that's a very small number. I know there was a couple of days this week where there were no new cases in DuPage County. So that's exciting. That's a 0.6% positivity rate for the people that are being tested. That's the lowest that's the 7-day average, by the way, for that rate. That's the lowest that has been since before they started keeping track of numbers when the pandemic first began a year ago in March. The 7-day average for deaths in the state has been 9. Now, obviously, any death is a tragedy, but when you look at 9 deaths among 13 million people per day, that number is really very small, especially when compared to other causes of death in our state. So we're thrilled for that as well. And as of yesterday, we had less than 450 people hospitalized statewide with COVID. So we're praising God that it does seem the vaccines have been incredibly effective, and that we are moving beyond the pandemic here in the United States. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not still there. And there's this Delta variant that we have to keep our eyes on. And for people who are not vaccinated, either by choice or because of medical reasons, or people, even though they are vaccinated, may be more at risk because of depressed immune systems, we recognize that there's still a very real danger. But we are celebrating that life is starting to get back to normal. And just there's a little chart just to kind of give you a sense. Obviously our biggest peak, our biggest problem was in November this past year, and we had another little bump after the holidays. And then another smaller bump earlier this spring in April. But the good news is here's where we are right now, and that is really doing very well. So our encouragement is we would love to see you back in person for worship. We're going to keep doing online worship. We'll say more about that in a second, but we believe it is safe. We would love to have you back for worship. We are worshiping at full capacity at all of our locations. If you are fully vaccinated, you do not need to wear a mask for worship. We are encouraging people to sing once again. And there is at our locations some places where if you need to still be socially distanced for your seating, either for your own safety or the safety of others, you are welcome to use that. But we do have distance seating available for those who need it. And again, just a reminder that online worship does continue at tlcforyou.online.church. And we are going to be continuing our preaching rotation online. One of the things we've heard from you is how much you enjoy getting a chance to hear from all of our site pastors as well as me. And so we are going to keep that preaching rotation going for the foreseeable future. Our long-term plan for online worship is, we know online worship is here to stay. But as we move into our next strategic plan, Nick will be talking about that in a little bit. One of the things we're going to be discussing as a part of that long-term strategic plan is, what does online worship really look like long-term? So 2-3 years from now, what does online worship look like at Trinity? And so that is yet to be determined and will be part of our online planning or long-term planning. But for right now, worship continues online as it has been, and we know that that is not only a great way for folks to worship that still cannot physically come back, but it's a great way for folks to worship when they're traveling. We've heard from a lot of people that they never went to church on vacation before, but now they've been tuning in, and so that's great. And we also have some folks that have gotten connected with Trinity during the pandemic who do not live nearby, and so they continue to get connected that way, and we are thankful for that. So let's go ahead and move on then to the ministry plan and budget for fiscal year 22. Remember, Trinity is on fiscal years, which means we start a new fiscal year next week on July 1st. And so we are asking you today to approve that ministry plan and budget, which we initially shared at the open forum. I was able to kind of compare lists for who was on the open forum and who's here today. And I know many of you, maybe even most of you, were there for the open forum. So we're going to hit the highlights for you and give you a chance to answer any questions before we do our voting today. The resolution that was in the documents you downloaded, I'll just notice that the final part of that resolution notes that the governing board recommends, that's how our process works. The staff prepares a budget, the board then approves that budget and recommends it to the congregation for final approval. And so the governing board, having reviewed this budget and ministry plan, recommends that that ministry plan and budget for fiscal year 22 be approved with an unrestricted revenue of just over almost 3.9 million, and expenses of also almost 3.9 million, resulting in a surplus of just about $2,000. So basically a flat or level or balanced budget. But as you noted, we noted from the open forum that it is being balanced with the use of excess funds from this last year. And Nick will talk about that more in just a minute. So what are our key targets? Before we talk about the dollars, we always talk about, well, what are we doing with those dollars? And in fact, the dollars are just the support for this, what we're actually going to be doing over this next year. So here's what you can expect to see us working on as a church during this final year of our ministry plan and budget. First of all, we want to come out of COVID stronger than we went into it. From an attendance perspective, right now we are there. When you take our online attendance and our in-person attendance and combine them, our worship attendance is some of the highest attendance we've had for years. But we want to also come out stronger when it comes to things like our small groups for our fall campaign that we'll be doing again this fall. And we want to come out stronger in our service to the community. You've already heard some examples of that with our alert team this past week. We also want to take seriously what it means now to be a hybrid church, a church that exists both online and in person. You know, before COVID, we did not have a weekly online worship presence. And within literally a week, our staff team had to put that together. And it's been a real blessing, and God has blessed it. And so what does it mean for us moving forward to be a hybrid church? We want to see some growth and generosity. You know, it's been a tenuous time for many people financially, but we do know that many people have come through the pandemic financially better than expected. We want to challenge people to be generous in their giving, not just so the church has more money, but so that we can make a bigger difference in our community and in the world around us. We also are going through a leadership transition, not only overall in the senior pastor role, but a leadership transition in our site pastor role at Trinity Kimberly Way as well. And so we want to handle those leadership transitions well. We need to put in place a new strategic plan, because this is the final year of our 5-year plan that we put together all the way back in fiscal year 18. And so we're going to be beginning that new strategic plan. And again, you'll hear a little bit more from Nick about that in a little bit, since he will be leading that charge. And then finally, we want to continue our work, our kind of a final push in our 5-year emphasis on leadership and discipleship growth and development. To help with that, this fall, we are doing something called the Being Challenge. You may remember 2 years ago, we did something called the Red Letter Challenge, which gave us a chance to look at the red letter words in the Bible, the words of Jesus, and to take those words a little more seriously. One of those emphases was simply being in the presence of our God, being people that receive his love and grace and recognize that everything we do starts with our God. And so we are going to, this fall, emphasize that particular part of the Red Letter Challenge, the Being Challenge. And we're going to look at, what does it mean for us to commit to being in community with other believers? What does it mean for us to study scripture? What does it mean for us to prioritize prayer in our lives and in the life of our church family? What does it mean for us to seek solitude, to be able to spend time alone with God as Jesus did with his Heavenly Father? And what does it mean for us to choose to be active in our church, and specifically choosing to be there for worship on a weekend and making that a priority in our lives? So we're going to be looking at that together and praying that that will help us grow closer to God and one another, help us be more like Jesus, and a wonderful opportunity for us to develop more leaders and be more committed in our discipleship. So I want to turn it over to Nick now. Nick is going to take us through our budget assumptions and the key decisions. Let me just say a quick word of introduction on that. Sometimes I get the question from folks, how can we really approve, you know, a almost $4 million budget? We can't dive into the details and things like that. And you're right. That would be really almost impossible for us to take the time to get you to that kind of detail. That's why we do this. That's why we give you, here are the assumptions that we used to create this budget. And here are the key decisions we made in this budget. What we're doing is we're highlighting for you the things that you should know as you're approving the budget. And so I'm going to go ahead and spotlight Nick, and I'm going to try to spotlight Nick.
I think you got it.
Yep, I think you did. Okay, Nick, yep. You're up.
Well, hi, everyone. I'll add my word of welcome to you all. Thanks for taking the time to join us for our congregation meeting. As Mark said, our assumptions are those things that we assumed going into the budgeting process. And what you're going to see is many of these were already guided by some decisions that we'd made in previous years, previous votes on ministry plans and budgets, A lot of them were also driven by the decisions we made as a congregation around how to use our Immeasurably More funds. So here were the 4 key assumptions we made as we went into the planning process. The first one, and this is always something that we list, is that we're going to invest in the vision, mission, values, and ministry plans of Trinity. As Mark said, the dollars are there to support what we feel called to do in the coming year. And so that is always our assumption, is that that's our primary focus as a church. You'll notice that the next 3, though, really were driven by our Immeasurably More campaign and where we're at in the process of that campaign. Second assumption was that Trinity Galewood and Trinity South Naperville's expenses would be fully covered in our budget, that no financial campaign dollars are going to be used for operating expenses. And the reason why is because we said that we would be using Immeasurably More to support those 2 sites for the first 3 years of the campaign. Well, we've finished those out. We knew that this coming year was the first year that they come under our standard operating budget. So that was reflected in a lot of our decisions as we started to put our budget together. Third, capital needs will be funded by Immeasurably More dollars. Again, this is the second priority from the Immeasurably More campaign. We are still committed to doing that. We have several capital projects that are happening at all of our locations. And so the Immeasurably More funds are now going to be used to really continue to work on those projects. And last but not least, any additional Immeasurably More dollars are going to be used to pay down our line of credit. We are on target with that, and it's doing really well. And so let me just say, on behalf of the entire staff team, thank you for being faithful to your pledges to the Immeasurably More campaign. That has been huge. And as you can see, that's allowed us to do quite a bit as a church, and will continue to play a key factor as we move forward into this coming fiscal year. So thank you all for that. Now let's switch over to talking about our key decisions. These were the decisions we feel we had to make this coming fiscal year to effectively support and invest in the ministry plan that we have moving forward. So the first key decision that we made is that we will use surplus funds from this past fiscal year to cover the deficit for the coming fiscal year as we move out of the pandemic. We knew with Galewood and South Naperville coming onto our standard operating budget that we had a little financial hill to climb as we came into this fiscal year. We've known that for a while as we've been trying to prepare for this year. What we didn't know is that we would get hit by a pandemic. All of our sites were actually on a great growth trend before the pandemic hit across all 4 of our locations. And obviously, ministry got stalled as a result of COVID. And yet, one of the things that was a wonderful blessing that we were surprised to see is that we are actually ending this year with a pretty significant surplus in funds. And so we made the decision, and the board approved this to actually have that surplus then cover some of the deficit we knew that we would have for this coming fiscal year. Mark is going to get into those specific numbers and kind of show you how it all breaks down in a moment, but that was a key decision we feel we had to make as we moved into the new fiscal year. Second, the budget includes the addition of an executive director position. This is actually something you all already voted on when you voted for the senior pastor transition plan, that we would also have an executive director who would come alongside that senior pastor to support the ministry and continue to guide us forward as an organization. At Open Forum, we announced that Sally Hegland will be stepping into that role January 1st. And so I'm thrilled and can't wait to work with Sally on that. But that is reflected in the new budget and ministry plan for the year. Third is that we anticipate a 4% giving increase over fiscal year 21 actual. Now, Mark mentioned that we felt that one of our priorities was to lean into generosity this coming year. And there's a couple reasons why. Our previous 2 fiscal years, we actually passed a flat budget from a giving perspective. And so we felt like this is the year to kind of invite our entire congregation to kind of re-up in our giving and to consider what are the ways in which maybe I can be stretched to help support the ministry that God is calling us to. The second reason we thought that that was important is we know that many people have already completed their Immeasurably More commitments. And so we want to ask them to consider moving those funds over into our general fund. By the way, this is something that my family and I did during the Twice as Many campaign. When our pledge was done, we realized, oh, we didn't miss those dollars. And so why don't we just roll those into our regular giving toward the general fund? And we're asking everybody to prayerfully consider doing that. We do anticipate growth at all 4 of our locations. As Mark said, our worship numbers are looking good. We're seeing people returning to in person. And so we anticipate growth, not just people returning, but new members. It's been really inspiring to see how many new members have joined our church even during the pandemic. Through some of our digital Discover experiences and things like that. And so we're asking those new members to join us in giving to the mission that God has called us to do. Lastly, we want to re-engage our 19%. We had 19% of our givers stopped giving during COVID. And so we're trying to re-engage them and ask them to consider renewing their generosity. And so again, all that to say, we feel like this is the right time in our church's life cycle and where we are to say, we're going to try and do a stretch this year. And so we're projecting a 4% giving increase for this year. Fourth, there will be investment to continue our online worship presence moving forward. You'll see that reflected in kind of our org chart and our budget as well. Online is here to stay. And so we're going to continue to invest in that as a way of reaching people and ministering to others. And last but not least, this budget includes a new location for Trinity South Naperville, which they're actually having their grand opening on July 11th in the 95th Street building. So we are really, really excited to celebrate that as South Naperville finally moves into what we always hoped would be their kind of worship home. So we're really excited about that. So those are our budget assumptions and key decisions. I want to actually hand it over to Mark now. He's going to walk you through some of the numbers to kind of help you see what we're talking about in those assumptions and key decisions.
In fact, I'm going to highlight Sally here for a second. And Sally, maybe you could just give us, since Nick mentioned our Measurably More campaign a couple of times, maybe you could just give us a quick update on how we're doing with that.
Yeah, just a word of thank you to all those who give to Immeasurably More. So many of our people are so faithful, and especially we've seen that with Immeasurably More, even over the pandemic. We had pledges when we started the campaign of about 3.5 million, and to date we've received 2.3 million. So those pledges are strong and they're coming in faithfully, and we expect by the end of the campaign, which is in 2 more years, that we will have it fully funded. And we just wanted to say thank you for your faithfulness and generosity, and just for keeping up with that passion for that, for the Measurably More and where those dollars go.
Cool. Thank you, Sally. Really appreciate that. Okay, so let's go ahead and take some time to take a look at the numbers. This is the budget summary. And again, this has not changed since the open forum. We did not receive any significant feedback that necessitated any changes here. So let me explain to you just for a second what you have again today. We have a number of columns. You have, first of all, we've given you fiscal year 19 actual as well as fiscal year 20 actual. And I'll talk in a minute again about why we did that. Then column C is our budget for fiscal year 21, the year that we are just ending, coming up the end of this month. And then you see the fiscal year 21 actual and projected that are there in column D, and then the budget that we are asking you to approve is in column E there for the fiscal year 22 budget. By the way, column F there shows you the change in that budget from the prior year actual. So that's comparing column E to column D. And then we've also given you a comparison back to fiscal year 19 as well, just because that was the last full year of actual results that weren't affected by COVID. So again, to help you think that through, fiscal year 19, which is that first column, was not affected by COVID in any way. Fiscal year 20 was affected about a third of the year by COVID, because we were 8 months into that budget when the pandemic hit in March of that year, that ministry year. And then the second to the last column there is our fiscal year 21 budget, which was obviously fully affected by COVID the whole year. And then you have the fiscal year 22 budget, which we're hoping isn't affected at all by COVID or the pandemic. But, at this point, who knows? If I've learned anything over the last year and 3 months or so, it's to never say never, because this, I can honestly tell you, has been the craziest year of my ministry, and probably for a lot of your lives. Now, the one thing I did want to highlight at the bottom there, at the bottom of our actual from this fiscal year 21, is note that we were ending the year with a $322,000 surplus. That's from decreased spending on ministry. Some of those choices that we made to decrease spending, other those choices that just happened because of our response to the pandemic, things we just couldn't do during the pandemic. And also remember, we received a PPP loan from the government, and those funds have been fully forgiven and are included in our cash now, and so they contributed to that surplus as well. So at the top of the total fiscal year 22 budget column, you'll see the contributions that we are anticipating of just over 2.8 million. Again, that reflects that 4% increase that Nick talked about, that we are confident that we can reach over this year by challenging people to be good stewards of all that God is giving, by re-engaging some of those people that have become disengaged during COVID, and by encouraging folks that are completing their Measurably More campaigns, and just the kind of growth that we're anticipating to see at all 4 of our sites over the next year. There's other revenue there as always, and then that surplus from the previous year. So that's how we get to that 3.234 number as far as revenue. When you go down a little further, you see our mission partners and our benevolence is there. Notice our mission partners and mission projects are still funded at the same level they have been in previous years. We continue to invest in them. Our church at large giving is down a little there, and that's really reflecting our actual giving that we've been doing. We don't just throw money out there. We look for church at large projects, things within our synod are happening around that we can help support, and that reflects about what those numbers have looked like over the last couple of years. And so that's why that is down actually a little bit there. If you go further down, you can see all of our different ministry areas and the amounts spent there. Again, some of those jumps from last year seem pretty big. Like, for example, if you take a look at the total youth program line, you'll see it's a $26,000 increase. But if you go back to the 2019, when there was no COVID to affect that ministry, it's actually a small decrease. So that's why we've given you both those columns there to see that we aren't proposing huge increases in spending along the way. And then if we go down a little bit further, you'll see what we're anticipating is a net gain loss in our Grounds for Hope at Trinity Green Trails. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Our Trinity Kimberly Way preschool net gain loss there, as well as we restart the preschool. We do anticipate it will have to operate at a deficit this year. We know our long-term plan is for that to be in the black. And the good news is our Trinity Early Childhood Center at South Naperville was in the black this last month. I believe, if I've got my numbers right, maybe Mike can send me a text if I get them wrong. I believe at one point, at the highest point, we were at 67 in enrollment, and we are at 58 right now. We do have a waiting list again in one of our classrooms for the fall, which is exciting. And so we are seeing those numbers begin to come back and respond after COVID really affected our early childhood center pretty dramatically, not only from the times when we had to be shut down, but from the times when, because so many parents were working at home, they didn't need childcare. So we are really thrilled to see that coming back, and we anticipate it will be in the black again next year. Let me circle back to that Grounds for Hope. As we announced at our open forum in May, Tony and his team there at Green Trails have made the decision not to reopen the Play Center and the cafe this fall. In fact, the plan is to not do that during this next ministry year because of a couple of things. First of all, there was a budget issue. I mean, we anticipated there would probably be some loss there, trying to get things ramped up again. But as Tony explained it to me, that budget issue really just called attention to the ministry and made him sit down and pray and consider. And we really believe that while we were getting a lot of traffic in Grounds for Hope and in the Play Center, not a lot of those folks were converting into actually becoming members of our faith community. And there were some. We have a few baptisms, a few families that started worshiping with us because of that. But the reality is we weren't at a level where we were seeing the kind of return from that ministry as people becoming more like Jesus as we would have wanted in its present form. We also were paying a lot of people to staff where we really believe volunteers should be staffing. And so in Tony's mind, this year was needed to really concentrate on building up our lay leadership, our volunteers, to giving some real thought and prayer to reconfiguring that ministry in such a way it can have a greater impact in the community. And our hope and prayer is that at some point that will reopen. We're not saying that that's closed forever. The goal is we would hope to reopen that and be able to move forward in the future, just not yet in this fiscal year. One of the things that was asked at the open forum was, well, what's the latest org chart look like? So I want to talk you through that a little bit right now. First of all, and I noticed there's some questions coming in. I'm going to address those questions in just a few minutes. So first of all, just as you know, when we take a look at our org chart, it starts with the congregation. Ultimately, you are the ones that are in charge, and you elect a governing board to work on your behalf. And that board then works with me as the senior pastor, or we've also added Nick as senior pastor-elect there because, as you know, during this year, Nick will be taking over as our next senior pastor. Let's talk about that Green Trails effect there by not opening up the Play Center and the Grounds for Hope. You'll notice we don't have a cafe coordinator here in the budget or any baristas or things like that. Also, Melanie Lohmeyer, who is on the staff at Green Trails, her position is no longer needed there because of not reopening the cafe and the Play Center this fall. But as we move down here to the central office line, you'll see Melanie there. Her position has been reduced to a part-time position, working as an assistant to the business manager. As Nick spoke of before, during this next year, Sally will be moving into that executive director position, and that means taking some of the business manager things off her plate. And so Melanie is moving there in a part-time role to assist with that. Also want to call attention to our children, youth, and family area that Amanda is our director of. There are some changes there. One of those changes is we had a staff member who was in charge of our junior high program. That is going to now fall onto Amanda's plate. When Amanda first started with us on staff, she was in charge of that ministry on a part-time basis, and she is looking forward to being back in charge of that ministry and working directly with it again. You'll also notice that we had 2 part-time people in our area of Shine, and at one point this year, after our work camp is done, Craig will be stepping back from that position, and Dave Rivera will be the only person in the part-time in our Shine ministry there. Also want to call attention to Trinity Galewood, not because there's been a staffing change, but because, as you may have heard, Pastor Dave has received a call, an offer to become the senior pastor-elect at Webster Gardens Lutheran Church in the St. Louis area. Dave and Gretchen are praying about that right now. When someone receives a call from another church like that, they prayerfully seek what is God's will for their lives moving forward. And so I had a chance to sit down with Dave and Gretchen this week and talk with them a little bit. I know they are really wrestling through this call, and they are taking some time, and hopefully at some point in July, they will come to an understanding of what God's will for their life is. Of course, we are praying that it's God's will that they would stay and continue to be our site pastor and there at Trinity Galewood. But if they believe God is calling them away to a new ministry, we believe God will provide, and we will, of course, immediately begin looking for a replacement for Dave. We are very committed to the ministry there at Trinity Galewood, and know that God will provide no matter what God reveals to Dave and Gretchen about their future as a family. And then notice there's a new location on here, which is our online site. Right now, I'm listed as the site pastor there, or the leader for that location. I'm the one that coordinates, making sure that that's all together and that the rotation is working. And I work directly with Dan Franzen, who's our media coordinator, who produces those services online every week. By the way, if you get a chance to see Dan or talk to him, please thank him for his efforts over this last year and a half. We could not have done what we did without Dan and his leadership and his gifts. And so we are so thankful for Dan and all that he has done. So we do want to take some time to get to some questions right now. It looks like some of the questions have been answered, but let me take a look and answer some of these. So the question is, when will Green Trails renew in-person Saturday evening services? I don't know if Tony
Mark, can I chime in on that one?
Oh, sure, please do.
Yeah, I was just chatting with Tony about that very question. So what Tony wants everybody to know is that they actually have a meeting scheduled on July 14th at Green Trails to discuss that as a site. It's part of his team Green Trails. And so he says, if you are interested in hearing kind of what's next for Saturday night and hearing what's involved in getting those restarted, he would love to have everybody join him there. That's when they're going to be talking about that, and he would love to have a chance to really talk that through with those who are interested. So that's the answer on that question right now, is join us on July 14th to talk about how they're going to be planning for that.
Cool. Thanks, Nick. Glad that's why he's the senior pastor elect, because he's more on top of the stuff than I am. So great. Thanks. Appreciate that, Nick. Next question. When appropriate in your presentation, please explain the costs associated with the key decisions for a new TSN site. How are we funding it? So our 5-year strategic plan that we're ending this year, one of the key bullet points in that plan was a permanent site for Trinity South Naperville. So we've been working towards this for 5 years now. And all along, we've been praying that the worship space directly across the hallway from the Early Childhood Center would become available for our South Naperville site. South Naperville has been, when we originally were approached about starting that Early Childhood Center in South Naperville, we believed that God was calling us to do it only if we could also have Word and Sacrament ministry worship connected to that Early Childhood Center. As great as it is to help families and children learn about Jesus through their early childhood experience, we don't believe that's enough. We believe having a worshiping site connected is the right way to do that. And so that was our plan all along. And the goal was that we would be in the space that we're moving into next week. In fact, we thought we were going to be able to do that almost 3 years ago. And then Compass Church, who was using that space, decided that instead of relocating to another church building that they were looking at relocating to, that they were going to instead build their own building, and that took a lot longer. So they have just recently moved into that new building and made the space available. We've been able to talk with the building owner, who, by the way, is the same person that helped us financially establish the Early Childhood Center in the first place. And he has basically given us a year to use that space at a very, very small cost. When you compare it to our lease costs at Trinity Green Trails, for example, it is about, I think this is just off the top of my head, I think it's about 15% of the cost. So dramatically less for this year, to give us a chance to see what happens with our worship attendance there at South Naperville. There's no doubt that our South Naperville worship attendance has not grown as quickly as we liked. Now, the good news is when COVID hit last spring, we had seen some fairly significant growth over the previous months. And that, of course, got shut down or waylaid by COVID. But we also believe that the location from the very beginning has been a concern. We were worshiping in the Burkett Freshman Center at the high school there, which was hard to find and difficult to get to. We were then moved into oh shoot, I can't remember the name of the Park District facility right now, but I was just there for worship this morning. You'd think I could remember it, but I can't. We were able to move into that Park District facility, which was a great Fort Hill. Thank you. Somebody just chimed in the chat. The Fort Hill Park District facility, great facility for worship. Problem is, it's not South Naperville. It's actually North Naperville. So not very close to the Early Childhood Center, which is the goal all along. So we are really praying that now having this opportunity to move into that space connected with our Early Childhood Center is going to be a great blessing. One of the other kind of amazing things that we didn't even realize 5 years ago was coming is there are some new housing developments coming in immediately around that South Naperville location. In fact, if you look online, you'll see that that area is the fastest, it's projected to be the fastest growing population area in the state of Illinois over the next 10 years. And so what a blessing that God has already paved the way for us to be there and ready to use that site. And we're really excited to see what God does. By the way, I would encourage any of you who are interested to come check it out. Worship starts there next week, July 4th, and with really a big grand opening to the community. We've been putting out mailings and door hangers and things in the area for July 11th. We would love for you to come join us for worship for a week, or who knows, maybe join us for months. We would love to have you there. Next question is, what's the percentage of our compensation versus income? What is the target for that, and how do we prepare to previous years and other similar sized churches? What a great question, Bob. Thanks for that. So one of the things that Trinity is looking at right now is the size of our staff relative to our overall spending. We're at about 60% right now. And for churches our size, anywhere from 50 to 70% is fairly normal. Although I would say once you get up around 70%, that's normally for churches that have a day school. So that you're talking about staff for that day school as well. And that does skew that number. We would like to be closer to 50, and we're at about 60 right now. So one of our goals over these next years is to continue to take a hard look at staffing. And again, part of the problem, like, for example, going back to the decision regarding the play center and the cafe, because those are very labor intensive things, the way they were configured, those are the kinds of things that would keep our staffing levels fairly high compared to our overall spending. We're hoping to engage more and more volunteers. So when the time comes for us to reopen that, it would not be a staff intensive ministry, but a ministry that all of us at Trinity are contributing not only our treasures, but our time to as well to help make happen. And so there's actually two numbers we are looking at, and one of them is the one that Bob suggests, that percentage of our overall, we actually look at the size of the budget. So we don't look at income, we look at overall spending as it compares to compensation. And as I said, that's right at about 60% right now. But then we also look at, there's a calculation based on the number of full-time equivalent staff to your per 1,000 in worship attendance. And so we're looking at that number as well. Those two numbers together can give you a different picture, but can give you a really clear picture of how you're doing from a staffing perspective. And I would say right now, when you look at both of those numbers, we are not hugely overstaffed. We are slightly overstaffed. And so the goal over the next years, my guess would be part of what comes out of our next strategic plan is looking at that number and how we can better engage volunteers in our ministry. Question about early childhood, and we do believe in early childhood education. We believe in that because it's a great time to influence families with the gospel. And as you know, 2 of our sites right now have early childhood happening at them. We're really pleased to hear that the Kimberly Weiss site is going to be reopening the preschool this fall, and excited about that. We know that at our Galewood location, we don't have an early childhood program, but we have it after school programs, a chance to influence the school that is there, et cetera. So we continue to look at those options. Another question, was the key decision to shut down Grounds for Hope and the Play Center made independent of the means for funding TSN? Absolutely. So I've heard this from a couple of people, and it's really kind of a strange thing. I'm not sure exactly where it comes from, but there's been some question that because we're doing South Naperville, we couldn't reopen the Play Center at Grounds for Hope. That's just flat out not true. Each site, decisions are made independent of each other and how we're working with those sites. Now, certainly our whole budget is one big pot. And so certainly if you increase spending in one area, it's got to come from somewhere. But there is no direct relationship between the work that we are doing at South Naperville and having a permanent site for worship there, which again, that's been part of our strategic plan for 5 years now. There is no direct connection between that and not reopening the Play Center, Early Childhood Center. I do know one thing. Tony and I talked about this past week. He told me that if right now someone pulled out their checkbook and wrote us a check for as much money as it would take to tomorrow reopen Grounds for Hope and the Play Center, he still wouldn't do it. Because again, it may have been the financial numbers that caused some focus in that area, but it was really the ministry concerns about, are we really reaching people with the gospel, or are we just providing a community service that isn't really connecting people to Jesus? And are we really engaging volunteers, or are we simply paying staff to do something that the rest of our church isn't really interested in doing? Those were really the main concerns made in that decision. Okay, I don't see any other questions right now. We'll give you a minute to think of any that you may have, and barring that, we will go ahead and move to our vote in just a few minutes here. So if you want to just think maybe if there's any other questions you have.
Mark, can I chime
Yep.
in and clarify one more thing about the Play Center?
Sure,
They're not
please do.
opening. Yeah, they're not opening to the public. The Play Center is still available for people to rent out for parties and events like that. And we are still going to have a ministry to those people as they use our space. And so Tony wanted to be very clear about kind of how we're using the space in the meantime. So just to be aware, it doesn't mean that it's just going to be vacant during the week. There's still going to be quite a bit going on in the Play Center. But again, I want to double tap on something Mark said. As we talked about it as team leaders, and as Tony wrestled with that decision, that is a ministry decision that we made. Our greatest desire is that the Play Center would truly be a ministry of Trinity, using volunteers from Trinity to reach our community through it. And so we're really going to be working on our core this year as we're trying to get ready to say, how do we best use that space to bless our community? What does it mean for us to be involved in running it? And so again, my biggest encouragement to you all is I know that's a big point of conversation at Team Green Trails, which Tony hosts every month as they talk about how do we use our gifts to serve. And so the next one's on July 14th. Go. If you want to know what do we need to do to continue to be firing on all cylinders at Green Trails, join them for Team Green Trails. So that's really where they're having a lot of those conversations and working together around some of these big questions this year.
Cool. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate that. So seeing there are no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll, Ken, if that's all right with you.
Yes, just had to get off mute. Please do.
So therefore be it resolved that the board recommends the congregation approve the ministry plan and budget for fiscal year 22. With those numbers as we've reviewed for you, that voting is open now. Vote yes if you're voting to approve, and no if you would rather not approve that ministry plan and budget for another year. Remember, when this vote is over, please don't leave, because we do have one last item we want to talk to you about, which is the senior pastor transition. And Ken and Nick are going to be filling you in on some of the details there. I'm kind of watching the voting. No one else has voted. So, whoop, one more just came in. So we'll give you just another couple. Oh, two more just came in. We'll give you just a couple more seconds. And all right, voting was going to close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll go ahead and end that. And I'll share the results with you right now. As you can see, 89 voted yes, or 94%, 6 no. And so the budget has overwhelmingly passed the ministry plan and budget for another year. So thanks for that. I'm now going to go ahead and turn it over to Ken. So Ken, let me throw you up there. There you go.
Okay. So one of the things that we wanted to do is just kind of go over with everybody what's going on with the transition. But let me take a step back a little bit and just to kind of review with everybody where and how we got to where we are today. So initially when Mark came to the board and identified that what his plans were for retirement, or I should say not being in the senior pastor role any longer, we started through a process. And initially we thought this was just going to be doing a succession plan. But as we started to take a look at it, and as we started to look at how our church has grown and how it's structured and the number of like direct reports that the senior pastor role had, we knew that it was going to turn into more than that. And that's what it turned into, from a succession plan to a transition plan. So we had a small subcommittee working with the entire board. And last summer, we presented to all of you what that transition plan was. And last year in September, in August and September, we went through and talked about all of that. And we as a congregation voted and approved that. So in September, Nick was called as a senior pastor-elect. As we were going through that process, one of the things that we knew from doing that and from getting input from other members of the board was that we needed to do some benchmarking, and we needed to find out what other churches were doing that might have been in similar situations. And so, because we wanted to make sure and incorporate some of the lessons learned and some of the best practices that were out there. So one of the churches that we wound up going to was King of Kings over in Omaha, and got their input. And they are in the process of, they're kind of like at the tail end of this overall transition process for where we're kind of, in the middle, almost a little bit farther than the middle. And so a few weeks ago, Mark and Nick and Sally wound up going back out to King of Kings to once again find out what was there and how we can make sure and be, as good and as efficient as we can. And one of the things that was identified was, they got some feedback that people in the congregation really weren't sure what was going on with the transition, hence why we're giving you this update here right now. So I don't need to read the timeline that's here. Other than that, we've got some key milestones that are in fact coming up. So at the end of, January 1, Nick does become our senior pastor, and Mark goes on a well-deserved six-month sabbatical. And Sally Hegland will then also be our executive director and fill that role. And then as we go on, then we don't let Mark go on sabbatical for that long. We bring him back in July, and then Mark's going to return in a support role on the staff. So those are some of the main highlights there. I didn't know, Nick, if there were anything else you wanted to add, or if there are any particular questions that people had as to where we're at, but we just wanted to provide that update.
Sure. Yeah, I can chime in on that, Ken. I think one of the big things that you all can know we're talking about is that last milestone that you see Mark returning from his sabbatical. One of the big bits of feedback that we got when we visited King of Kings was he needs to have a clear idea of what the heck he's doing when he comes back here. And we're actually using the next 6 months before Mark leaves on sabbatical to talk about that. And Mark will be coming back in a supporting role, and really excited to start those conversations with him. And of course, we are going to continue to try and give updates, especially as we move into the next 6 months as the transition plan goes forward. So this isn't the last time you're going to hear some updates from us. These next 6 months are going to be pretty critical for getting ready for that leadership handoff, so that our desire is that when January 1st hits, it doesn't feel like a whole lot has changed because over these next 6 months, we've done a lot of hard work to get ready for that transition. So that's what I would say about that. Wanted to give a couple of updates about the TKW site pastor transition, as well as our next strategic plan. Just because I know people were asking at the open forum. This transition is not just a transition for Trinity overall, it is a transition for our site and our location. And so we are looking for that next site pastor for here. I have had several conversations with some potential candidates. I've got a couple of people considering. I've had a couple of no's. Here's what I would ask from you all as a congregation. is for prayers for whoever that next site pastor is. One of the challenges in finding kind of the next site pastor for Trinity Kimberly Way is that we are a very unique church. And our site is a very unique site in the sense that we do liturgical worship. But we do it very in a very mission-minded way, structured around the central preaching of our series and things like that. And so it requires a little bit of flexibility in being a site pastor, which is actually rare in our church body, where liturgical worship is basically you just do whatever's in the hymnal every single week. We don't do that. We put a lot of thought and effort into how we do worship here. Carol Armbrecht has been amazing in helping with that. But it's also a person who needs to not just know how to do worship and preach, but really have a heart for things like small groups, for community engagement, and for service. And so we want to find the right person for our culture, the right fit. And so that's why we're still, processing that and really thinking through who those people are. Like I said, we're in conversation with a couple of individuals, but they're still considering it right now. And so what I would ask from you all is pray for God to be preparing the heart of the right person as we look and as we approach some of these individuals. I have talked with members of our district staff saying, kind of, here's our culture and our background. Do you know of people out there who are kind of looking? I've talked with people at the seminary. We've talked with people in our networks. That's how we're getting names. People who know us, who know our culture, and who might be a good fit for that role. The last thing we want to do is rush and just try to fill that slot. So we are being very, very intentional. Conversations are happening, and excited about that. I wish I had more that I could say and say, hey, we have a person. We don't yet. We still got 6 months, and we still are having conversations. So the biggest way that you can help and encourage us is by prayer. The other thing, though, is I have been working with a group of congregation members over the past year in a leadership cohort here to help kind of carry some of those responsibilities. And if you've been in worship with us at Kimberly Way, you've actually seen some of them up front. Just this weekend, John Bogue was helping lead liturgy. Bill Armbrecht has done likewise. I've had a couple of those other cohort members have been doing some practice preaching just for me, and may actually preach on a Sunday every once in a while, kind of in the same way that I did way back when, long before I was a pastor. So we've been doing a lot of training to help kind of carry the load in the meantime, as I'm starting to take more and more of Mark's responsibilities over these next 6 months. So just be praying for that as well. It's been really, really exciting and fun to see some of those people step into that role and use their gifts in that way. Greg, yeah, good question. I'll pause here while we're talking transition before I jump this strategic planning. Greg Zander, you asked, this was partially answered, but I'd like to hear more. Nick is senior on January 1st. Mark is going on sabbatical for 6 months, but coming back. What is he coming back as? Great question. He's coming back in a supporting role. We are talking about specifically to do what over these next 6 months. We will have an answer for the congregation before the transition actually happens. So we've had some initial conversations. We're really talking about what would be the best use of his time and his energy in that role, but he will not be coming back as senior pastor. He'll be coming back in a supportive role under my leadership as senior pastor. Mark, did you want to say anything more about that? Can't hear you. You're still muted.
Sorry, was muted there. Yep. Oh wait, now I'm getting into. Oh, there we go. Okay, good. No, I think I'm back. Yeah, no, I think Greg and others who are asking. I mean, there's a couple of things. First of all, initially our thought was that I would be coming back full-time for a year, but as we're looking at the budget for next year, we think that might be a hill to climb. So it may be more of a part-time role coming back. So we have to make sure we have that determined first. And once we know that for sure, then we can look at some areas. It'll be things that, first of all, I feel gifted in and have been able to be successful in my ministry here at Trinity, but also some things that Nick and Trinity need. And by the way, that will always be at the You know, when you're on staff in the White House, you say, I serve at the privilege of the president, which means at any moment, the president can look at you and say, I don't need you anymore, and you're done. And that will be the same thing. I will serve at the privilege of the senior pastor. If at any moment Nick says, Mark, I don't need you. I know God will have something for me to do, and I will gladly find it and do it. When I first came to the board back, it was 2 years ago now, and told them that there was an end date that I was looking at where I wanted to be done. I told them I'd be glad to serve as senior pastor all the way up to that end date, or I'd be glad to step out of the senior pastor role earlier than that if the right person was ready to step into that role, and there was a transition that the board would say would be most helpful for Trinity. And so the timeline for all this has been in the board's hands. I'm thrilled with it. I'm thrilled that God has called Nick to step into the role that I've been in for these last 20 years. And I'm excited about what God has in store at Trinity and beyond Trinity for me moving forward. I just, again, am so thankful to the board for their hard work at getting us to a transition plan that I believe will work. I hear again and again of churches our size where the transition does not go well. And so we really want a chance to hopefully have God lead this in such a way that it goes perfectly. And so I'm very thankful to the board, and I'm thankful that Nick and Sally are going to be stepping into the roles they are, and very confident for the future of Trinity.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, Greg. Let me talk about the strategic plan a little bit, and then I do know that we've got at least one other question was submitted. Maybe a few more will jump in.
I might be able to answer that. I'll type the answer for that one.
Okay. Yeah, if you're wondering,
thanks.
some of the answers we're just going to type. And so if you want to see those typed answers, if you do open that Q&A tab, you can go to, it shows you where the answered questions are, and you can see our written responses. So if you want to refer to that, that's another place where you can see those answers as well, if you're wondering about something. So that question, let's move to the next strategic plan really quick. So we are beginning a brand new strategic planning process. It was set to start in July, actually, looking ahead to kind of the next couple of years of ministry. Really what we're going to be focusing on in this next strategic plan is what it means to be one church in multiple locations. We're really going to be taking a very focused look at our multi-site strategy. How can we make it better, stronger, healthier, so that we are continuing to not only have healthy existing sites, but also be ready for if God calls us to plant more churches, to reach more people. And so we're going to be taking kind of the next strategic plan process to really say, what does that mean? What does that look like to be healthy? And we're actually going to be working with an outside consulting group that's worked with over 110 multi-site churches. So they've kind of seen all different kinds of multi-site models, and they're going to be coming alongside us to help us answer some critical questions as a church as we develop that plan. And so the first phase of that plan is in August. We're going to be doing some meetings just focusing on our multi-site health. How are we as a multi-site church? Where are we strong? Where are there areas of weakness that we need to do better and could be healthier in? That's going to be taking place in August. September, we're going to be looking at strategic planning for multi-site, asking questions like, what is our ministry model? As we think about what it means to support healthy, growing multi-sites, what does that look like? And what are the key disciplines surrounding that? And then in October, we're going to be looking at multi-site staffing and structure. So how do we staff and structure ourselves as an organization to get the most out of multi-site? And the reason why that's an important question is many multi-site churches, this actually goes back to Bob Zeman's question earlier, what they experience is actually from a staffing, finances, and resources perspective, that multi-site actually not only ends up having some cost savings, but actually better deployment of resources for the sake of ensuring that all sites are healthy and thriving and reaching more people. And so that October session is really going to be focused on kind of that side of it, the organizational and financial side. How do we use the best of what God has given us for the sake of reaching more people? And so that's where we're going with the multi-site process, where we're going with our strategic planning over the next couple of months. Once we've kind of gone through that initial phase, we'll then really start putting together kind of a strategic plan. And we always share that with you all as the congregation as well. We have members of our staff, members of our board are going to be a part of these conversations, and kind of looking forward to seeing where that's going to take us over the next couple of months. So that is that's a little insight into where we're headed in our next strategic plan.
So thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. There was one other question that came in directly to the panelists that I think might be useful for everybody to hear. So I'm going to throw that out there. It's what's the process for calling the site pastor at Trinity Kimberly Way? It's the same process we've used for calling the site pastors for all of our other sites. All along the way, including how Nick was called, including how Tony and Dave were called. We do a search through our staff in our constitution and bylaws and policies. It is really the senior pastor that is charged with finding that person. And then that person is finally then brought to the congregation for that final call. Our constitution reserves the right of the congregation to issue that final call for the pastor. So Nick and I will continue that process, assuming that I'm still senior pastor at the time when we find that right person, which we hope will be the case. That will be done before the end of this year. I will eventually identify that candidate, obviously working with Nick and working with volunteers and leadership and staff from Trinity Kimberly Way. We'll then bring that individual to the congregation. The governing board will call a special voters meeting, and we will bring that individual to the congregation for a call to be the new site pastor at Trinity Kimberly Way. Remember, our goal at Trinity is to always look internally first. Is there someone that's presently a part of our ministry that is ready to step into that pastoral role? Again, that's how Nick was first identified and stepped into a pastoral role. That's how Tony was first identified. That's how Mike Curtis was identified and stepped into a role. If you go back some, that's how Dennis Franzen and Dan Grissom were also identified. Scott Thomas was also identified that way. So that's been our history, that we look internally first. But when we don't have one internally, someone that got us prepared, we do look out externally, and that's how Dave McGinley was identified. He was a student at the seminary that we became aware of, so that process continues, so we will be looking both internally and externally. As Nick said, we already are. We've let our district know that we're looking if there's an external candidate that presents itself. But remember, ultimately, in our polity, the way we were set up, it's the senior pastor's job to identify that site pastor that would work under his direction, and then bring that site pastor to the congregation for a call. So that will be the process there. Another question that came up is, can the senior pastor override a bad decision by a site pastor? Yes. But I don't know that any of our site pastors have ever made a bad decision. So no, I'm kind of being facetious and joking, Barb. Sorry, it's not that I know Barb well. It's not that I'm not taking your question seriously, Barb. Ultimately, the senior pastor is responsible for everything that happens in the ministry. Now, we have given a lot of autonomy to our site pastors to make the right decisions at their sites. I can tell you, as senior pastor, I don't know everything that's happening at all 4 of our sites. And so I trust our site pastors to be good stewards of the ministry that's been entrusted to them. Certainly, if there's a controversial decision that a site pastor is making, we have some extensive conversations about it. I can tell you that, I don't know if there's a specific decision, Barb, that you're thinking about, but I can tell you, for example, I know that there's been some controversy over Tony's decision to wait a year to reopen the Play Center and Grounds for Hope. That wasn't a decision he made in a vacuum. He made that decision, first of all, through a lot of prayer and a lot of consulting on his team, but also consulting our whole team leaders team. And then finally, in consultation with me. Most of the time, how our team leaders function is that there's a lot of discussion, and we normally come to a consensus together. In fact, I should tell you, we even do this little thing where we call it fist of five, and we'll say, okay, here's the decision. How comfortable are you with that decision? 1, 2, 3, and everybody holds up a hand. And if it's 5 or 4, and there's all 5s or 4s in the room, we move forward. If there's a 3 or a 2, we go, whoa, wait a minute, let's talk about it. But that said, ultimately, there are some things where, as the senior pastor, it's been given to me by you as the congregation and by God through you to just make a decision. And so there are some times where I will even tell the team right up front, look, we're not voting on this. I have to make the final call on this as the senior pastor. I have the responsibility for this, but I do want to hear what you have to say, and I do want to get your input. And I would love it if we can all do 5 on it, but in the end, the senior pastor, the buck kind of stops there, and they are responsible to the governing board, and through the governing board to the congregation for the overall ministry. So there have been times, I'm sure, where in consultation with a site pastor, I told him, look, I know that this is where you'd like to go, but I just can't support that because ultimately I'm responsible for what happens at your site. I'll be honest with you, the weight of that, I'm eager to hand that off to Nick in 6 months. It's been 20 years, and I'm ready for that. Another question, how will Trinity intentionally include candidates of color for the interview process at TKW? We would not in any way limit any candidate that God presents to us for a possibility of a call. And so while I'm not saying that we would intentionally try to stack the deck in any way or another, we are seeking the person that God has planned for Trinity Kimberly Way. And that process I just talked about before, that process we believe is the way God speaks and presents us with the candidate that God has chosen for us for that location. And so we would certainly be open to whoever God has for us there. Let's see. I don't see any other open questions right now. I'm glad to, as I always do, stay online for a little bit if there are some more questions that come in. But in the meantime, Ken, I want to hand it back off to you, and you can go ahead and entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting, unless you have something else you want to add.
Thanks, Mark. No, I do not have anything else to add. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. So this is where I'd much rather be in person instead of having to do this online. But do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Yeah.
I'm still a member. I can do that.
Right. And then we need a second.
Second.
Okay. I'm not sure how we do all in favor. Is there? I don't think we have a poll question.
No, I think we can. I think we can just go ahead and adjourn the meeting, Ken. I think that's what we've done last time. I don't know that we actually took a vote, or maybe we go ahead and we could do the raised hand thing if people want to.
All right. So all in favor of adjourning our meeting, hit that little raise hand button.
Hey, this is
numbers
actually
are going
working.
up fast, Ken.
This is actually working.
Numbers are going, hands are going up, and people are going down. So I think it's time. Yeah.
We have a majority. Yeah, it actually worked. So.
Well, thank you everybody for your time. Once again, if you do have any questions besides, Mark or Nick or Sally or anybody, please reach out to any one of us as the board as well. And thank you for taking the time, and looking forward to seeing all of you soon.
Yep, I just add my word of thanks to all of you, not only for the meeting today, but for 20 years worth of annual meetings. So thanks very much. And remember, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be around. So looking forward to seeing you all. And again, as Ken said, welcome any questions here or through email, things like that as well. So again, thanks. And I'll keep the meeting running for just a little bit if anybody chimes in with another question. Otherwise, have a blessed day. Get out and enjoy the good afternoon. Thanks, everybody.